From a trip to the moon at the turn of the century to Apollo 13, movie audiences have always been captivated by spectacular special effects. Today, with the advent of computer technology, a digital renaissance is taking place in motion picture production. Join us as we celebrate 100 years of movie magic and visit famous monsters and towering infernos. Come with us as we go behind the scenes and meet award-winning visual effects directors as they bring Gremlins to life. Blast off to the moon in Apollo 13 and travel into cyberspace in Lawnmower Man 2.
Mark. And action, Guillermo.
Request data transcripts Joe virtual life.
Action on a dolly.
Today, the art and science of creating motion pictures has changed dramatically.
Cut.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So just sit like you're going to sit. You will not be getting up.
You push through. Push through. You look at him and you stand up.
The capabilities of computer hardware and software have allowed filmmakers to create scenes that have never before been possible. With state-of-the-art digital techniques, perhaps the only limitation to what can be created on film is the director's imagination. In the beginning, the fact that pictures could move was magic enough. Snapshots were brought to life in these early scenes of everyday events. Entrepreneurs such as Thomas Edison realized they could bring entertainment to the masses with these simple films. The Lumiere brothers were the first to project a moving picture to the paying public. Their film, Arrival of a Train, is said to have caused the audiences to bound from their seats in shock at the approach of the train. One of the earliest films to use the camera for a special effect was The Execution of Mary, Queen of Scots. The Queen kneels at the block, and a life-size dummy replaces the actress. More than a few viewers marveled at the actress's sacrifice. The French magician cinematographer Georges Méliès is considered to be the father of special effects. Méliès realized the camera could be used to manipulate reality. In his most famous film, A Trip to the Moon, Méliès uses split screen, multiple exposures, and mechanical stage tricks to produce a humorous and innovative fantasy. To the Moon deserves its place in history as the first science fiction film. In the early 1900s, movies seemed to have lost their popularity. Taking a cue from Méliès, filmmakers captured popular imagination by using a narrative, giving the movies a fresh lease on life. The Great Train Robbery consisted of scenes placed together to tell a story. With its non-theatrical sets and dramatic close-ups rather than stage props, gimmicks, or tricks, the audiences of the day were stunned. This early Western made use of some of the first matte shots. In the mail car, the landscape can be seen through the open door. When the film of the landscape was shot, the set area was masked off. Then the film was rewound and the set area photographed with the door area masked off. The resulting film was a composite. By 1912, glass shots and miniatures were used to replace or add portions to a scene. Even the most famous of all movie sets, the Walls of Babylon, built for D.W. Griffith's Intolerance, had cutouts and glass shots to increase the size and detail of the set. Large panes of glass were set between the camera and background, and miniatures were strategically placed. In the 20s, epics like Ben-Hur used miniatures hanging between the camera and full-scale sets to create the appearance of one single massive stadium. Fritz Lang's futuristic fantasy, Metropolis, impressively blended every tool available to the special effects teams. With the advent of sound, overnight, the fundamentals of filmmaking changed. The need to shoot on sound stages triggered the studios to develop their special effects departments in a systematic way. With pools of technical talent, the effects departments created many new techniques, leading in just a few short years to RKO Pictures' release in 1933 of King Kong. Kong was the logical extension of the films of Méliès, Griffith, and Lang. Live action combined with large-scale mechanical effects and Willis O'Brien's innovative stop-motion animation created a compelling sense of reality. Much of the background of this cave set scene has been painted on glass. Intricate miniature sets have been combined with previously photographed live action projected onto miniature screens camouflaged by rocks. Adding the 18-inch stop-motion Kong creates a scene of astonishing realism. This film is as entertaining today as it was 60 years ago, and many of the techniques developed for King Kong are still used in today's modern epics.
In the early days, we had 7 major studios, and there were effects departments in all of them. Fortunately, at RKO, being the smallest studio, we did everything in the one department, and therefore I had the opportunity of learning by working in all these categories. Since the studios closed, then naturally there had to be independent effects houses to handle all this work. And many of the fellows that worked in the studios opened up their own places like I did and carried on into the independent field.
We've done is basically become the effects department for the studios. We're like a little mini studio ourselves. We have all the various departments under one roof that enable us to do visual effects from start to finish. If I walk around the studio in my mind, you would have the art department, you'd have the production office, you'd have the shooting stage, the model shop, the matte painting department, you'd have film processing, animation, optical, editorial, of course, projection, engineering, both electronic and mechanical. All these are various departments, and the beauty of having them all under one roof is there's a cross-pollination that happens, so that somebody from another department may even come up with an idea that will affect you. So it's a great sort of think tank approach to creating sort of impossible images in a lot of cases. Sid is a really talented person and peculiarly talented in terms of future think. He thinks in terms of how designs will be in the next century, or and he has a real good sense of that, and he's a great designer on top of that. So not only does he know how it will look, but he knows how to make it look that way.
The rocket ships, all those set designs were done specifically to make the story more dramatic and more entertaining and more believable to a large audience.
Sid does not design every section and every piece. It's a feeling that he comes across, and so you need to have basically an architect who can take that basic conceptual idea and make it work in all of the various details of the model.
Models are used when either the real article is not available, or it's, for instance, in a spaceship, it doesn't exist, so you have to build it in a model. For instance, back in the old days, when, say they needed an ancient castle, obviously in Hollywood or Los Angeles, there are no castles, so they have to be built in miniature.
At the turn of the century, models were used to present historical events to the public. The Battle of Manila Bay was recreated on a tiny set the size of a bathtub, using a number of simple special effects. Models were used by the studios to save costs in common everyday scenes, or to create futuristic settings such as in the Buck Rogers serials. Miniatures also offer filmmakers a safer way of creating the costly destruction that audiences come to expect in Hollywood's action pictures.
During Die Hard, they would not allow us to damage the Fox Plaza building. So we had to build miniatures of the Fox Plaza and then crash the helicopter off the top of it. With miniature pyrotechnics, you have to make everything burn much slower and still have enough power to destroy the device.
Rolling and speed.
The helicopter was ignited, then a computer was triggered, which lit the fire on the building, threw the helicopter off. We were basically hired to patch up problems they couldn't get in live action.
Hollywood's full-scale action scenes create the appearance of high explosives with calculated precision. For the production of Demolition Man, special effects coordinator Joe Ramsey is responsible for the planning and execution of a number of scenes featuring pyrotechnics.
We know what our fires are going to do ahead of time. And the reason we know what they're going to do is what we've done before. We've done it before, we know what it's going to do, and all your precautions, all the safety is done up front. There's so many different types of fires. One type of fire would be, let's say, we'll start with the basics, propane type fires, where you're running controlled. I have a propane bottle, I have a hose, it goes to a propane bar. This is a slotted bar, now it's going to go ahead and give flame. I know it's only going to flame where I put these bars. It's only going to flame as high as I allow the propane bottle to go.
The opening scene of Demolition Man involves a complex explosion using 13 cameras, 2 helicopters, and the destruction of an abandoned Department of Water and Power building in downtown Los Angeles.
In this film here, we deal with a lot of explosions and fire and also very dangerous stunts, but I don't know, it's just something that I think that if you can do it, it just adds a lot to the movie.
Joel Silver, who's the producer on this show, said, Joe, I want a lot of fire. I love fire. I want a lot of fire in this building. Now, I can't have it mask the building, though, when the building falls. And we said, okay. So in talking with the rest of the group, we went ahead and devised to what we thought was best, and we did do some tests to where we changed harder pushes in certain areas, lighter gas, heavier gas in other areas. We did so many tests on to how long a fireball would last. And granted, you're not doing it on the scale of that, to where when you're on such a big scale, it's you have variables. It could last a little longer, a little shorter. But we thought we had it down to what was the right amount.
Hollywood pyrotechnics create huge explosions by using slow-burning materials to give the blast shape and color for the cameras to photograph.
We'll use gasoline or naphthalene or benzol or hydrofire, diesel fuel. Each one gives you a different color. Some are red and yellow. Go to any alcohol and it's more of a blue. Then we mix it all, so it depends on what the director wants to see. We can give you a totally blue fireball, green fireball, red fireball.
To create fireballs, a large steel pan called a mortar is used to shape the charge.
If I wanted to make that fireball go wider and less high, I'd take and use a dish mortar, which would look like a big bowl. That would allow the fire to be thrown out. You gotta remember, a bomb throws in 360 degrees, so what we're doing is directioning the bomb. What we're doing there is, you notice that's a V mortar, it's directioning it up like that. So all the push is up and out. Dish mortar would allow it to throw even further out. If I wanted to throw a fireball straight up, I'd use what they call a shotgun mortar. That would be basically a piece of pipe that would direction it like a rifle barrel, straight up. And here is a little 3-ounce black powder bomb. And that's going to be our lifter for the actual gas. That'll atomize it, lift it, spread it out. What he's tying in right now is a flash pack. That'll actually ignite the gasoline.
Motion picture pyrotechnics are set off electrically using a 12-volt motorcycle battery.
What I'm doing is tying in a button, so I can set this off with just a button type. 3, 2, 1.
For a fiery explosion, mortars with gasoline were set directly behind every window. The full-scale collapse of the structure was prepared by another group called Controlled Demolition International.
The building explosion was probably one of the best explosions I've got to work on. And the reason being is it was being tied in with the second company where you actually have the building drop afterwards. So we made the outsides heavy gas where they would continue to roll and burn. The inside we made quick bursts of gas so it'd burn, disappear, and as you see in the film, when it disappears and clears, you get to see the whole building fall. That was a big shot, and it's only one time, so you're going, oh, come on.
In action films, pyrotechnic shootouts are carefully choreographed. The safety of the actors and stuntmen is the first priority. In the early days of motion pictures, slingshots with marbles or ball bearings created the illusion of bullets striking objects. Slingshots with chalk left a puff of dust on impact, representing ricocheting bullets. Today's Hollywood shootouts use miniature charges known as squibs to create the illusion of bullet hits. Another faster method is the use of a small air gun to create bullets raking a scene.
Okay, is that your gun hand? Yeah. Okay, here. We use this mainly so there's no wiring, it's faster. It will spark as though a ricocheted bullet hits a car or metal or concrete.
Classic horror characters continue to delight audiences. They are created from the imagination and ingenuity of Hollywood's special effects makeup artists. In the silent picture Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, starring John Barrymore, there was only ordinary stage makeup to help the actor define the transformation between Jekyll and Hyde. It was the actor's facial contortions and body movements that created Hyde's dark character. Actor Lon Chaney's simple makeup box contained little more than grease paint and mortician's wax, but his mastery of the art of makeup led him to develop a number of extraordinary characters. One of Chaney's most famous characters was Quasimodo in Victor Hugo's The Hunchback of Notre Dame. It took Chaney 3 hours a day to apply the nose putty, plaster hump, and leather harness that kept him in a stooped position necessary for the character. Chaney's performance was a mastery of body gestures expressing emotions hidden under a thick layer of makeup. In 1924, Chaney began filming his most famous and memorable role, the Phantom of the Opera. In addition to his extraordinary makeup, Chaney knew that the placement of lights could either ruin or enhance his creation. He tested various makeup and lighting to determine the correct impact on screen. When the audience finally sees the Phantom unmasked and views him in all his horror, they are repelled. But as Chaney's character reacts to the knowledge of losing his love, he wins their sympathy. Universal Studios makeup artist Jack Pierce created Frankenstein, the Wolfman, and the Mummy, and inspired future generations. One of the youngest artists influenced by these pictures was Rob Bottin, who won an Academy Award for his work on Total Recall.
Actually, I was a big fan of monster movies since I was 7. And I always wondered who were these guys that made these creatures. So I actually started reading comic books and going to the library and trying to look up the history of makeup. So actually in one comic book I found out that there were a couple of guys that were still alive, one of which was Dick Smith, who did The Exorcist. And I was a really big fan of his, you know. So then they ran an article on his protege, who was Rick Baker. And, you know, I sent Rick a picture that I had drawn when I was a kid in exchange for his autograph. And Rick saw this picture and he said, I don't believe that a 14-year-old kid can draw like this. So he had me brought out to his studio in North Hollywood and he asked me if I wanted to work for him. Every monster that I make is totally different. I really just like to imagine things. You know, I'm a big daydreamer. It's rare that you'll actually see me, you know, people always say, God, you know, it's great what you do for a living. You know, you just sit there and you think, you know, like, and that's what I do. You know, I just sit there and like I start daydreaming and thinking this stuff, and much like a writer, you know, would write. You know, you face the blank page. I sit and I think, well, let's see, what's this going to be like and why, you know.
One of Rob's most original designs was for the cyborg in RoboCop. The RoboCop suit evolved into a stylized human form, which took about 8 months to finalize.
Total Recall, of course, you know, was a really, really neat opportunity, again, because I got to work with Paul Verhoeven, the guy that directed RoboCop. And Paul, you know, again said, do whatever you want, you know. And one scene in particular, which I really like, is when Arnold is trying to escape the bad guys, and he disguises himself as this big, heavy-set lady. What if he's got on like this futuristic mask? And what happens is the mask malfunctions. You know, they're questioning him, and all of a sudden the mask malfunctions, starts repeating the same thing over and over. And then all of a sudden the head opens up like, you know, Venetian blinds, you know, boom, 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 and reveals Arnold like da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Paul says, well, can you do this? You know, like that, and I said, well, I don't know how to do it, but I mean, wouldn't that be neat? Would you like that? And he goes, oh, certainly, this would be great. So he said, do it. So that's in the movie, and then, you know, that movie was the first time I won an Academy Award for my special effects.
Another way creature creators bring movie monsters to life is stop-motion animation. In 1933, King Kong, the most famous monster of all time, was brought to life by Willis O'Brien. After half a century, this basic technique is still effectively used.
On Ghostbusters, I was called in to oversee the Terror Dog characters. I redesigned them based on their concepts, and then sculpted the miniature stop-motion puppet, which is a quarter scale. Oversaw the sculpting that Mike Hosh led of the larger, full-size versions, because they worked both as stop-motion puppets and as full-size on-set props. And then actually did the animation of the characters when they were running around and leaping and doing all that sort of thing. Stop motion's a process that utilizes the uniqueness of the movie-making illusion, where you actually are seeing a series of still images projected in rapid succession to give the illusion of movement. With stop motion, you fool the mind by shooting a succession of still images in what you infer would be the increments that they would appear had this character you're pushing around been moving in the real world, in real time. When you're ready to shoot the frame, you turn on the camera controller. It interlocks the camera and the projector. This character is photographed after the live action has been photographed. You shoot a frame of the creature in conjunction with a single frame of movie film projected behind it. There are all sorts of ways to bring creatures to life, of course. Stop motion is one of many.
Puppetry is the art of manipulating characters. Today, with the use of computers, puppets are taking on a life of their own.
Hello, everyone. I'm the big new star of the big new movie, Gremlins 2, The New Batch. And here's someone very special to tell you all about it.
The technology is evolving so quickly that the things that we're doing in this picture now, we couldn't have done 6 years ago in the other movie.
Because the lip sync is so difficult to perform live and takes so many people, and because Tony Randall talks so quickly in this film, I decided that the best way to do that is to pre-program all the lip sync dialogue and perform the rest of it live. Then we actually just program the upper lip first, and then the lower lip and the tongue and the jaw, each at a separate pass, and then the Gilder Fluke will play it back at real time.
Boy, this is a really good movie. And there you have it. A true unsolicited testimonial from Gizmo himself in his very own words. So listen to Gizmo. You know he'd never lie to anyone.
If a little gizmo or a gremlin is crawling along the floor, there's usually a hole in the floor. And so it's always a big question mark as to where this hole needs to be. So first we start out with a small hole, about 3 inches, and then later on at the end of the day or the end of the shooting of this particular sequence, the set will look like Swiss cheese because there's holes all over the place. They're not 3 inches, but they're this big.
In the second movie, we had already had the experience of doing the first movie, so we were much more prepared and knew pretty much what had been done before and what we wanted to do differently. In a sequel, you have to try to top the first picture, and there were a lot of things that were just not technically possible for us on the time and budget that we had on the first movie that we knew we would have to have in this picture. So when we went to Rick Baker, when we were writing the script, we tried to include him.
They came to me before the script was even finished, and I said, why don't we do this? Why don't we do this? And this would be a really thing to try, and they added that stuff in the script. And every day that we shot, we made up stuff. Joe says, what are we going to have him do today? It's like, well, I don't know. What do you want him to do? He goes, well, have him throw stuff. I said, well, how about if we do this? And he goes, okay. So, that's what was fun about working with Joe. He's real open for suggestion. To create a character, we'll start with a two-dimensional sketch. So I usually do drawings first, and sometimes full-color paintings. We sculpt the new features, make molds of those parts. In those molds, we put rubber, which has to be baked in the oven, foam rubber usually. And it's painted, and you put hair on it, and the mechanics are built for it. It has facial mechanics. It really varies for each thing.
I wouldn't exactly know how to tell somebody how to do this, because on the surface, it just looks like you point the camera at it, and you turn it on and you turn it off. But in fact, the number of puppeteers there are and the amount of communication that has to go on to get even the simplest thing to happen when you want it is just something that comes with practice.
Until the 1970s, the movies were still employing many of the same special effects techniques developed in the 1920s and 1930s. In 1975, George Lucas formed Industrial Light and Magic and took model photography and optical printing to new heights. John Dykstra orchestrated the spectacular motion control photography that used computers to move both the camera and models precisely.
What we came up with is a way of controlling the camera and the subject relative to one another, basically recording the moves that each of those pieces make. And this became what we commonly refer to as motion control. Now, what this allows you to do when you're doing miniature photography is to lay down separate elements of film with different subject matter on them that are all matched together with the same move.
This technique created the thrilling space battles the audience loved.
This is the Star Wars optical printer right here. And this again is a camera. And it looks at a piece of film that's here and another piece of film that's here. And that's a lamp. And again, you rephotograph the one piece of film, and then you rewind the camera, and you do a double exposure, and you rewind the camera, and you keep doing that endlessly to create this kind of picture. So in that picture like this background was 3 pieces of film, a red, green, blue separation. Each spaceship took 7 pieces of film, so you got 3, 14, and the engines were 1 piece of film each, 15, 16 pieces of film, little separate pieces of film.
The 1989 Academy Award-winning picture, The Abyss, required all the visual effects tricks known to create an environment seemingly without effects. The effects teams combined radically different environments, water and air, to create the illusion of a futuristic adventure 2,000 feet below the surface of the ocean.
Jim had done a film, his very first attempt at shooting underwater. He said that basically sets that were left underwater overnight were destroyed by the following morning. So it was determined very early on that we would shoot in some sort of tank.
During the filming of the live-action sequences, divers were submerged 6 to 7 hours a day in underwater sets. Scenes too complicated to shoot underwater were filmed in miniature on dry stages.
Jim Cameron, who basically did most of the boarding, along with John Bruno, for quite some time, came to DreamQuest along with other effects facilities with the idea of breaking down the shots into specific categories or areas. And he came to DreamQuest with most of the motion control type work. Boards were already complete, as if you can probably see some we have up here. Essentially, what he wanted to do was find out our technique and ideas of how we would go about accomplishing the shots. So it did some thinking and came up with some suggestions or ideas of new techniques that might allow the effects to look more realistic than probably could have been done with standard technology.
And action, John.
The director and effects teams built foam core mock-ups of the models and underwater sets to carefully choreograph and plan each scene as it would appear in the final film. Using videotape and stills of a cargo shipwreck 800 feet underwater as reference material, they returned to the stage to match the look of the abyss as closely as possible to reality.
Okay, coming to the stop point.
No, keep going, keep going. That's just to create a relationship.
FX 57 is a shot where Lindsay and the crew, the group who are in the submersibles, begin the reconnaissance and trying to find a sunken submarine. Basically, what it is a shot of 3 small submersibles going along the hull from the stern of the sub all the way to the bow of the broken nose of the sub. And again, it's being intercut with live-action real footage of submersibles that they did in South Carolina in the big tank. What we did is we used the gantry system, the gantry motion control system, to hang the submersibles and then shot it using about 6 passes, some shot in smoke, some shot in clean air, and through the combination of the passes, filtration, and lighting, we're able to give the feeling that we were shooting actually underwater. Most of the time, when you're doing motion control work, you have separate film elements. In this case, having the actual models working in the same room, in the same environment, it allowed the lights from the submersibles, which were the only light source in the scene, to actually illuminate the background, which in this case was the sunken Montana.
When we started The Abyss, we looked at using traditional techniques. In other words, shooting the subs against a blue screen and compositing them into a background, in this case a Trident submarine. The advantage the gantry system gave us was that we were able to do everything pretty much in camera. We spent the extra time to build this enormous rig, and it took much longer to program because instead of maybe 8 or 12 axes of movement, suddenly we had 32 going all at once, all 3 submarines, and in addition to the camera moves and any other little gags we had going on at the time.
The models on the particular part of the gantry were kind of special in the sense that they had to be self-contained. In other words, the submersibles had to have their own power sources, they had to contain the rear projectors, and they were quite large. Dave Goldberg was in charge of actually designing and coming up with a lot of the solutions in constructing the models.
A rear projection system was used within the submersibles to give the illusion of the actor actually being inside the craft piloting it. The film was shot of the actors in a full-size set prior to our shooting the miniatures, and then used in a projector that was built and put inside the models. The finished illusion would be that even though you were looking at a miniature, you would be seeing live-action people inside of it.
The scenes are shot in separate passes in order to control exposure and color of each element. Using the technology of motion control, the effects teams duplicate the movements of each model perfectly for the final composite. The light from the miniature subs in smoke makes up one pass. Another pass in clean air uses fill light in order to see the details of the models. The image of Lindsay is rear projected into the cockpit of the miniatures in a separate pass. The final composite is made up of these and other elements, including a pass for strobe lights and bubbles, which add to the underwater look of the scene.
The sequence is where Lindsay's outside of the broken, damaged deep core, and she's literally on the edge of the abyss, standing there, and she senses this colorful light, and this huge type of ship, kind of glass ship, comes up. And so it's made up of a number of cuts. And the first one is, of course, a wide-angle shot where we see Lindsay and some of the wreckage and the edge of the abyss as we see the mantis ship rise up and over the edge. That was done dry for wet. In other words, Lindsay, who was actually a stunt person shot months later at Harbor Star in San Pedro, was shot against a blue screen in air. We then cut to a close-up where we're down low looking up as the manta wing kind of passes over top and she reaches up and actually touches the surface. This one we're close enough that the bubbles and her regulator and just the whole way that the water moves and the bubbles come off the top of the manta ship required us to shoot it underwater. In order to give the illusion that her bubbles were coming in contact with the surface of the manta ship, what we did is we hung plexiglass mirrors in the water at the plane of which the wing would actually coincide.
These are the finished boards of the pseudopod sequence, which were the scenes exactly as we would have liked to see them. Looking these over, we sat down one day and said, well, it can't be done. Not by any means that I know of, or other than computer graphics, but we were really nervous about CGI basically because at that time, CGI still looked plastic.
The first photorealistic computer-generated graphics were produced by ILM for the film Young Sherlock Holmes. A computer created a stained glass night not possible with any other effects technique. For The Abyss, CGI would need to be pushed beyond its known limits.
Here we were asking it to do water. So we talked about all these other ways. One was replacement animation of acrylic pieces. But with the length of the shots required, we thought that would be insane.
At this point, Dennis Murin of Industrial Light and Magic suggested Alias Research computer animation system to produce the pseudopod.
Those tests showed some possibilities, but initially it looked a little chrome and still a little plastic, but it looked like it was possible at least to get all the motion that we needed. And then we figured if it didn't work, which a lot of us were not really positive, that we would just cut the sequence shorter or we would light it dark.
The scene required an alien probe made of seawater to float in midair as it encounters a crew of humans. The effect was so difficult that it could not have been done by any other means than computer-generated imaging. The The evolution of digital technology has provided filmmakers with the opportunity to attempt projects never before possible. To have contemporary pop star Paula Abdul perform with legendary dancer Gene Kelly would have been impossible without computers. The challenge for R. Greenberg and Associates was to provide an interaction between the two dancers and match the original camera moves.
We've gone to great lengths to figure out the lens information that was used on the old footage and things like that so that we can match things as closely as possible.
The intention is to create seamless choreography between the 40s and the 90s. For lighting and shadowing, reference material was filmed using a stand-in for Gene Kelly to help determine where the shadows should fall and move. The first step is to isolate and pull Gene Kelly's image from the original background. A mat or cutout is created and tested for fit. Gene is then placed into the scene with Paula. Adjustments are made in color, movement, and lighting. Once completed, the elements are combined into the finished piece.
The thought of dancing with Gene Kelly and Groucho and being able to be in the scene with Cary Grant, who wouldn't love to be in a situation like that? These are heroes of mine.
Record and music.
With this commercial, everything is a matter of seconds, and I have to hit certain marks, like tape marks, because of the motion control camera or because of the icons. I don't want to cross over, and you have to work everything out.
There's just one, and there's no mistaking it, one. Just no faking it, one.
Why don't you and me do some fancy stepping tonight?
Oh, with that cool style in it, ooh. Just for feeling, Diet Coca-Cola. Just for the taste. No, the more we find it, just one with something behind it. Cola taste, you know there's just. And there's just one, and there's no mistaking it, one.
For Terminator 2, visionary director James Cameron and Industrial Light and Magic again pushed the boundaries of special effects with the creation of the advanced, shape-shifting T-1000. The T-1000 was a liquid metal killing machine with the ability to change its form. A computerized morphing technique was employed to digitally transform the T-1000 in a single uninterrupted shot. A live-action shot of the actor was digitized, and a computer model was split open digitally. Then the software program automatically closed up the severed facial features. The next breakthrough in CGI came in the creation of the living creatures of Steven Spielberg's Jurassic Park. First, the background plate for the computer-generated T-Rex was shot on a set. The dinosaur was introduced into the scene and animated in wireframe form. The background plate was scanned into the computer and composited with the wireframe model. The fully rendered T-Rex was a collaboration between special effects, artistry, and science. Cinesite Digital Film Center is creating all of the digital imaging for Lawnmower Man 2. Cinesite and Allied Entertainment are producing these ambitious cyberspace sequences using computer graphic animation blended with live action to create images that exist only in the filmmaker's imagination.
Digital effects is using computer software or computer hardware to create or manipulate images that already exist. Let's take maybe a script that takes place in the 1920s or the 1930s, okay? And you really want to recreate Times Square in New York. It's very costly to do that now, but there is so much historical footage of Times Square in the 1930s that you could take that footage, you can clean it up, colorize it, contemporize it, and put it into your film. So when you have scripts now that are talking about you know, faraway lands, or locations that you can't go to or might not exist, or characters that can't be fabricated by any other means. You can put them all together and create them in a computer using digital technology. So really, there are no boundaries anymore.
Digital technologies, originally developed for industrial use, are being introduced into the entertainment industry. Viewpoint Data Labs produces a three-dimensional catalog of digital models.
The human form is always the very best. To take a picture of you would be ideal. And this technology is basically only going to be used when either the person is dead or when the person, you know, something unusual needs to happen. It's always been very difficult to try and digitize the human face. And so this is one way, using lasers and mirrors, that can be achieved. So we foresee the cyberware as just playing a companion role, and as technology becomes greater and more stars want to spend less and less time in front of the screen, or the creative minds come up with new things for actors to do that can't be done with traditionally. An actor can't blow his own head up, but we'll be able to do that with the data that's provided by this machine.
Everyone's so excited about the technology, which is great, you know, but it's really an after effect of our primary goals, which is doing good entertainment. I mean, that's what's really going to sell, and we're trying to do it digitally. We're trying to do digital cartoons and digital movies. We're able to take an actor with all his talents, his or her talents of portraying dramatic scenarios, and record their motion very succinctly into the computer, in fact, at 100 frames per second. As you can see, there's sensors all over the body here that are being read vis-a-vis a large magnetic standing wave that's being created by a magnet under the floor. And the sensors are strategically placed on points in the body that are basically joint points for mechanical relationships of body motion. You have complete articulation in the fingers. There's 22 sensors that are being read in real time as well. And that goes back into a normal PC at this point, and then gets networked into a silicon graphics machine, which will display it in real time. Then at that point, you really, the world is wide open. You can superimpose any database you want. It can be a cartoon character or a very realistic character, you know, Donald Duck or the skeleton, which is what we did.
Digital Domain, a full-service effects studio, was nominated for an Academy Award for Best Visual Effects for the film True Lies. For Ron Howard's Apollo 13, Digital Domain combined large-scale miniatures, CGI, and live-action photography to achieve photorealistic effects using state-of-the-art digital technology.
It's very exciting because I think it's very liberating as a director. You can shoot part of a scene, you can augment it later, you can change your mind and rework it. Almost in a way, you're able to edit within the image, within the shot. For the first time, you can edit within a shot, and that's never been possible before. I mean, the issue of whether we'll see Arnold Schwarzenegger starring in movies 500 years from now, I think very possibly, you know. I mean, I think that it would be possible, say within the next 10 years, to store his image and his voice in three-dimensional data and to animate it later. Yeah, he may still be around 1,000 years from now.
Even the best special effect is only as good as the actor's reaction to it. So if you have a really great effect and you cut to an actor who doesn't look like he's believing what he sees, then your effect is no good.
When you create reality, they call it special effects. And it's not an effect, really. When you get through its reality, if you don't think it's reality, it's not a good job.
I think that visual effect will continue to expand, and as long as they continue to satisfy the audience's desire to be put in a place they couldn't otherwise possibly be put, they will continue to be successful.